At 7:42 in the morning on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at WWII airfield in New Guinea. He watched his pilot prepare for a mission he likely would not survive. The pilot was Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old, 6 combat missions, no victories. That morning, 18 Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters waited to intercept the patrol. Hayes would be flying straight into them. McKenna had been maintaining P-38s for 8 months. He knew every bolt, cable, and bearing. It was a twin-engine fighter with twin booms, fast, stable, and powerful at high altitude. But it had one fatal flaw that was killing American pilots day after day. It could not turn with a zero. The Japanese fighter was lighter, more agile, able to complete a full horizontal turn in half the time a P-38 needed. That difference meant death. American doctrine warned pilots never to turn with a zero, never to try to outmaneuver it. Use speed, use altitude, dive in, shoot, climb out, strike and escape, do not get caught in a turning fight. Hayes had followed that doctrine 5 times and it had not saved him. The Zeros were too skilled. They lured American pilots into turns, cut inside their radius, got on their tail and shot them down. In 6 weeks, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s, most destroyed while trapped in turning engagements they could not escape. McKenna had seen too many die, good men, young men. They climbed into their Lightnings with confidence and came back in boxes or did not come back at all. The training manuals blamed pilot error. The instructors said the men were ignoring tactics. But McKenna knew the truth. The problem was not the pilots, it was the controls. The P-38's aileron cables ran through the twin booms to the tail, then back to the wings through pulleys. There was slack in the system, only 3/8 of an inch at full deflection. But that small delay between stick movement and aileron response could be fatal. At high speed it was manageable, but in slow, tight turns it was deadly. That fraction of a second meant the difference between rolling inside a zero's turn or being shot down. 2 months earlier, McKenna had brought it up with the engineering officer. The officer told him the tension was within factory specifications. Lockheed allowed for that much play in the cables. Adjusting it would void the warranty. Besides, no field mechanic was authorized to modify flight control systems. That required approval from Lockheed, 7,000 miles away in California, so McKenna broke the rules. He took a piece of piano wire from a damaged aircraft, cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a Z shape and fitted it as a makeshift tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes's left aileron cable. The job took 8 minutes. It added 4/10 of a pound of tension. It removed the slack completely. No one noticed. The inspection crew that morning checked engine oil and ammunition, not cable tension. McKenna said nothing. He simply watched as Hayes taxied to the runway, lifted off, and vanished into the New Guinea sky, flying toward 18 Japanese fighters. What happened over the next 17 minutes would change how every P-38 in the Pacific Theater flew. The first pilot McKenna ever lost to a zero was Lieutenant David Chen. July 9, 1943. Chen had been in the Pacific for only 3 weeks. McKenna had serviced his airplane every morning. They often talked about California. Chen was from Sacramento. McKenna was from Long Beach. Before the war, they had both worked on cars. Chen took off at 6:15 in the morning on a fighter sweep over Lee. He returned 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes in his left boom and a story about a zero that had cut inside his turn. Chen said he had tried to roll out and dive away just like the manual instructed, but the airplane had felt slow to respond, like there was a delay between moving the stick and the wings actually rolling. The zero nearly got him. The only reason he survived was that his wingman shot the Japanese fighter off his tail. McKenna examined the bullet holes. They were grouped tightly together, perfect deflection shooting. That zero pilot had led Chen's aircraft precisely, predicting where it would be at the exact moment of fire. That should not have been possible if Chen's airplane had rolled and dived instantly, unless there had been just enough delay for the zero to time the lead perfectly. Chen never flew that Lightning again. His airplane went to the depot for repairs. McKenna never saw him after that. 3 weeks later he heard the news Chen had been killed flying a different P-38 over Rabaul. Same story, caught in a turning fight, could not roll out fast enough. The second pilot was Captain William Morrison. Morrison was a flight leader, experienced, 11 confirmed kills. He knew the P-38's strengths and weaknesses. He was careful, methodical, never reckless. On August 3rd, Morrison's flight intercepted 8 Japanese Zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. He downed one on the first pass and turned for a second attack. 2 Zeros reversed on him. McKenna later heard the radio transmissions. Morrison tried to roll inverted and perform a split S maneuver to escape. His last transmission reported that his controls felt mushy. The Zero stayed on him through the maneuver and shot him down at 4,000 feet. Morrison's wingman later said it looked as though the airplane just was not responding fast enough, as if Morrison were fighting the controls. He died in the crash. Morrison's crew chief was a close friend of McKenna's, a mechanic named Rodriguez from Texas. Rodriguez was convinced something mechanical had failed. After the wreckage was recovered, he checked everything: engine settings, control rigging, cable tension. All readings were within specification. The airplane was, on paper, perfect. The official report blamed pilot error. Rodriguez did not believe it, neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. Some he had known well, most he knew only from pre-flight checks. But he had worked on every one of their airplanes, signed their maintenance logs, watched them taxi out, watched them lift off. Some returned, many did not. The survivors all described the same thing. The P-38 felt slow to react during hard turns, as though there was a small lag between control input and the airplane's movement. Most pilots assumed that was normal for a heavy twin-engine fighter with large control surfaces. A bit of delay was expected, but McKenna knew that was wrong. He had felt that delay himself through the tension in the control cables. That tiny bit of slack in the system kept gnawing at McKenna. He started paying attention to the sound the cables made when he tensioned them during maintenance. There was a distinct tone, a low, metallic twang when you plucked them. Loose cables sounded softer. Tight cables sang with a sharper pitch. McKenna could hear the difference. Every P-38 on the flight line had cables that sounded just a little loose, still within factory tolerance, but not tight enough. One evening after Morrison's death, McKenna mentioned it to Rodriguez. Rodriguez asked, "What can we do about it?" McKenna hesitated. "Nothing official," he said, "but unofficially maybe something. It would mean breaking regulations, the kind that could get us both court-martialed." The problem wasn't that American pilots didn't know how to fight. They knew the doctrine by heart. Every briefing drilled it in. Every training flight repeated it: never turn with a zero. Use speed, use altitude, hit and run, strike and climb away. The rules were clear, but combat didn't follow rules. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea for 2 months. 23 years old, a farm kid from Iowa. 6 missions flown, 0 kills, not because he was unskilled, but because he followed orders, and the orders kept him alive but ineffective. They kept putting him in positions where he couldn't get a shot. On his 3rd mission, Hayes dove on a 0 from altitude. He built up speed, 400 miles an hour, came in from the sun just like the manual said. He got the 0 in his gun sight, started to pull lead for deflection. Then the 0 snap-rolled left and dove away. Hayes tried to follow. The P-38 rolled into the turn but felt sluggish, like it was moving through syrup. By the time he pointed the nose where he wanted it, the Japanese fighter had vanished. He pulled out and climbed back to altitude. No shots fired. The 4th mission was worse. Hayes and his wingman bounced 2 zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes fired the first burst, missed. The lead 0 reversed hard to the right. Hayes rolled to follow. Then his wingman shouted over the radio, 2 more zeros diving from above. Hayes tried to roll level and dive away. The airplane responded, but slowly, just slowly enough for one of the diving zeros to land a 3-second burst into his right boom. 20mm cannon shells tore through the skin. They didn't penetrate the vital systems, but it was close enough to rattle him. He limped home with smoke trailing from both engines. The 5th mission broke him. He watched his wingman die, Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21 years old, from Boston. They had gone through training together. On August 14th, Parker got separated from the formation during a dogfight over Finchhafen. 2 zeros got behind him. He tried everything, rolled hard, reversed, scissored, but the zeros stayed glued to his tail. Hayes heard him over the radio, voice rising with panic. "My plane's not turning fast enough." Then came the gunfire, then Parker's scream, then silence. Hayes didn't sleep that night, neither did most of the squadron. Parker's bunk stayed empty. His personal effects were packed up and sent home. His P-38 was written off as a combat loss. The maintenance log showed no mechanical issues. The official cause: pilot error during defensive maneuvering. McKenna had worked on Parker's airplane that very morning. He knew every cable, every control linkage. Everything had been perfect: engine timing, control alignment, cable tension, all within specification. The airplane was fine, but Parker was dead anyway, and McKenna knew why. That fraction of a second delay in the controls, that tiny bit of slack the manual claimed was acceptable, had killed Parker, just as it had killed Morrison, Chen, and 14 others. The worst part wasn't the deaths themselves, it was the smell. Every morning the maintenance area filled with the heavy scent of aviation fuel, hot metal, and hydraulic fluid. It was the smell of flight, of aircraft being prepared for combat. Some of those planes would return, some would not. And McKenna would be there again the next morning, breathing in the same fumes, working on more planes, watching more pilots walk out toward machines that could not respond fast enough to save them. On the evening of August 16th, Lieutenant Hayes came looking for him in the maintenance bay. He found McKenna working on his assigned P-38. Hayes asked if there was anything at all that could make the airplane roll faster. He said he didn't care if it was by the book or not. He just wanted a chance. McKenna looked at him, at the fear, the exhaustion, the desperation in his eyes. He saw a kid who already knew he was running out of time. Finally, McKenna said, "Come back in the morning, I'll see what I can do." That night he worked alone. After 2,300 hours, the hangar was quiet. Most of the crew were asleep. The only sounds were the low rumble of distant generators and the soft buzz of insects beating against the overhead lights. The air smelled of oil and tropical humidity. He removed the inspection panel on the left boom of Hayes's P-38. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail. McKenna gripped the cable with both hands and pulled. He could feel the slack maybe 3/8 of an inch before it caught tension. His palms were greasy, his fingers ached from a long day of labor, but that looseness was unmistakable. It was wrong, he knew it was wrong. The piece of piano wire had come from a wrecked P-38 that had ground looped 2 weeks earlier. The aircraft was destined for the scrap depot, but McKenna had salvaged a few usable parts, including a 6-inch length of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He had kept it in his tool bag without really knowing why. Now he knew. He sat on the hangar floor with the wire and a pair of pliers. He bent it slowly into a Z shape. The wire resisted him, springing back with every bend. Twice his hand slipped. On the second try, he cut his thumb deep enough that blood smeared the metal and made it slick. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. It took him 8 minutes to get the bend right. That Z shape would serve as an inline tensioner, just enough preload to remove the slack from the control cable. Installing it was harder. The boom was cramped, the access narrow. McKenna worked one-handed, holding a flashlight in the other. The beam shook. Shadows jumped and flickered across the pulley system. His shoulder pressed against the boom frame. The metal edge bit into his arm. Sweat rolled down his back despite the cool night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction, fumbling with the tiny clevis pin. It slipped from his fingers and disappeared into the boom. He froze, listening, then heard the faint clink as it bounced somewhere below. He spent 5 minutes feeling through the darkness until he found it again. All the while, his heart was pounding. If the engineering officer caught him making unauthorized changes to a flight control system, McKenna knew what would happen. A court-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe even prison. But if he did nothing, Hayes was going to die. He slid the piano wire tensioner between the end of the control cable and the pulley assembly, then reconnected the linkage. The fit was tight, too tight. He had to force the clevis pin through with the pliers. When it finally seated, he gave the cable a firm pull, no slack. The aileron moved the instant he applied pressure. Perfect. McKenna replaced the inspection panel, wiped the blood and grease from his hands, packed his tools, and left the hangar at 1:15 in the morning. The tropical air outside was still and heavy. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the deep drone of aircraft engines, Japanese night raiders probably. The sound made his stomach knot. He had just modified a flight control system without authorization, using a part that wasn't on any Army Air Force list. He had broken at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed, Hayes would crash and McKenna would carry the blame. But if it worked, Hayes might live. He lay awake in his bunk all night, staring at the ceiling, waiting for dawn. At 6:30, he walked out to the flight line. He watched the ground crew fuel and arm Hayes's aircraft, watched Hayes stride across the tarmac for his pre-flight briefing, watched him climb into the cockpit. At 7:42, Hayes took off. McKenna stood in the humid morning light and watched the P-38 lift into the air, joining formation with 16 other Lightnings. They climbed northwest toward Japanese-held skies, and then all McKenna could do was wait. The engagement began at 8:14. Hayes's flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 9 Zeros at 13,000 feet over the Huon Gulf. The sun was behind them, perfect conditions for a diving attack. Hayes flew in the number 3 position. His element leader gave the order to bounce. They rolled in. Hayes picked a 0 near the back of the enemy formation and dove from altitude. His airspeed climbed 380 miles per hour. The 0 filled his gun sight. He could see the red rising sun painted on its fuselage. He could even make out the pilot's helmet glinting in the canopy. He squeezed the trigger. 4 50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon thundered. Tracers streaked across the sky, most missed, but a few rounds sparked off the 0's wing, not enough. The 0 snap-rolled right and dove. Hayes rolled to follow, and that's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No lag, no hesitation. The stick moved and the wings rolled with it, sharp and immediate. It was as if the lightning had been waiting for his command. He banked 90 degrees in half the usual time, dropped his nose and required his target. The Zero filled his sights again. He fired a 3-second burst. The tracers walked up the fuselage from tail to cockpit. The engine erupted in flame, debris scattered. The Japanese fighter rolled inverted and plunged toward the jungle, trailing black smoke. Hayes's first kill, but there was no time to celebrate. His wingman shouted a warning, Zeros diving from above. Hayes looked up and saw 3 of them coming fast in a shallow dive. They had seen him destroy their comrade, now they were coming for him. He shoved the throttles forward and began to climb, but the Zeros were faster in the dive. They'd be on him in seconds. Every instinct screamed at him to keep running. But his only real chance was to turn and fight. That was the doctrine, keep climbing, don't turn, but doctrine meant dying today. Hayes rolled hard left and pulled. The lightning snapped around faster than anything he'd ever felt. The nose sliced through the horizon, and there it was, the lead Zero. It was trying to follow him through the turn, but the pilot hadn't expected Hayes to reverse so fast. The Zero overshot, hanging exposed in front of him. Hayes pulled lead and fired. The burst struck the left wing root. The wing folded clean off. The Zero tumbled out of the sky, trailing smoke. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 Zeros tried to scissor, alternating turns to force him into an overshoot. Hayes stayed on them. Every time they reversed, his lightning snapped into the new turn instantly. No hesitation, no sluggish controls. The airplane obeyed his every input as if reading his thoughts. It was like flying a completely different machine, like someone had lifted invisible weights off the control cables. 1 Zero made a mistake. It reversed too sharply and bled too much speed. Hayes rolled inside its turn, closing the distance to 200 feet. He fired a short burst. He couldn't miss. The Zero exploded in midair, fragments whirling past the canopy. Pieces struck Hayes's right boom. The P-38 shuddered but held 3 kills. The 4th Zero broke off and fled. Hayes didn't chase. He was low on fuel and nearly out of ammunition. He climbed back to altitude, rejoined what was left of his flight, and turned home. The entire engagement had lasted 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at WWII at 9:03, McKenna was waiting on the flight line. Hayes shut down the engines, climbed out of the cockpit, his flight suit soaked with sweat, his hands trembling. He walked straight to McKenna, eyes wide, and said 2 words. It worked. Neither of them realized that 6 other pilots had witnessed the engagement from above. Captain Frank Mitchell, a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group, had watched the fight unfold from 15,000 feet. He'd seen Hayes's lightning maneuvering below, rolling faster and sharper than any P-38 he'd ever observed. The aircraft snapped through turns like it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew Hayes. Good pilot, steady, disciplined, but not that good. Something about his aircraft was different. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing room, still jittery with adrenaline as he filled out his combat report, 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked, what was different out there? Hayes shook his head. I don't know, the airplane just responded better, quicker. Mitchell frowned. Did maintenance do anything to it? Hayes said, you should talk to Technical Sergeant McKenna. 2 hours later, Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance bay, elbows deep in another lightning, hands black with grease and coveralls stained with oil. Mitchell didn't waste time. What did you do to Hayes's airplane? He asked. McKenna stared at him for a moment, then quietly explained the piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, he said, can you do the same thing to mine? McKenna hesitated. He warned Mitchell about the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested, and if anyone found out, they'd both be court-martialed. Mitchell didn't blink. I don't care, he said. He had lost 4 pilots from his flight in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't escape. If there was even a chance something could help his men survive, Mitchell wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38. Same piano wire tensioner, same careful installation, same risk. Mitchell flew it the next morning. When he returned, he could barely contain himself. The airplane rolls like a fighter, not a truck, he told his wingman. The wingman immediately found McKenna and demanded the same change. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread quickly through the squadron. Pilots began asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some chiefs refused. It broke every regulation in the book. Others were willing to try. McKenna showed them how. Cut a 6-inch piece of piano wire, bend it into a Z shape, install it as an inline tensioner, takes 8 minutes, changes everything. The modification spread pilot to pilot, mechanic to mechanic. No paperwork, no official approval, just quiet whispers in ready rooms and late-night maintenance bays. Hayes shot down 2 more Zeros on August 22nd using the new control setup. Mitchell downed 3 more on August 25th. Other pilots began returning from missions with their own victories. The statistics spoke for themselves. Lieutenant James Watkins, a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group at GUSAP, heard about the modification from a pilot who had transferred from WWII. Skeptical but curious, Watkins tried it on one airplane. The pilot came back from his next mission with his first kill after 8 weeks of combat. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft. Soon, other crew chiefs in the 49th started doing the same. By early September, around 40 P-38s in New Guinea carried the modification. The engineering officer at WWII suspected something had changed. He just couldn't figure out what. Cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the piano wire before the checks and reinstalled it afterward. The pilots knew. The mechanics knew. Nobody told the officers. The results were impossible to ignore. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 lightnings for every Zero they destroyed. By August, the ratio was 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed, but officially nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Late in August, reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American Lightnings were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly, and climbing out with greater control. Tactics that had worked for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most celebrated aces with 64 confirmed kills, was among the first to realize it. He had fought American pilots since Pearl Harbor. On September 3, 1943, over WWII, Sakai engaged a P-38. He used his usual method, draw the American into a turning fight, wait for the Lightning to roll, then snap back in the opposite direction to cut inside its turn radius. Except this time, it didn't work. The P-38 reversed with him, perfectly synchronized. Sakai had performed that maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long a Lightning took to roll. He knew the timing down to instinct, but this one rolled faster, much faster. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American already had guns on him. Sakai dove away, shaken and confused. When he returned to base, he wasn't alone in his frustration. Other veteran Japanese pilots were reporting the same thing. The Americans weren't flying differently, but their planes were. The P-38s were rolling and reversing faster by just fractions of a second, yet it was enough to ruin the timing every Zero pilot had trained to exploit. Japanese intelligence began searching for answers. They examined wreckage from downed Lightnings, looking for hidden changes. They found nothing. The aircraft looked exactly the same engines, same armament, same control layout, no new weapon systems, no strange components. What they didn't know was that the difference was buried inside the tail boom, a 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like original equipment. Even if they had found it, they might not have recognized its purpose. It wasn't a weapon, it wasn't technology, it was geometry, a simple adjustment in control cable tension. But that small adjustment was killing their pilots. By mid-September, Japanese Zero losses to P-38s were climbing sharply, higher than at any point since the early years of the war. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. For 2 years, Zero pilots had ruled the skies in turning fights. They had been confident, certain that nothing American could outmaneuver them. Now, that certainty was breaking apart. Pilots who once attacked boldly were growing cautious, hesitant. They weren't sure anymore if their tactics still worked. Some tried to adapt by abandoning turning fights altogether, switching to hit-and-run attacks, but that meant giving up their biggest advantage, maneuverability. The Zero's strength had always been its agility. To fight like a P-38 meant fighting on American terms, and the Lightning was faster, tougher, and hit much harder. Others went the opposite way, flying more aggressively, closing to shorter ranges before firing, taking dangerous chances to compensate. But aggression without the ability to outturn the enemy just meant dying faster. Several experienced Japanese aces were killed in September using tactics that had worked flawlessly only weeks before. The fundamental problem for the Japanese wasn't tactics, it was invisibility. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They knew something had changed, but they didn't know what, and without understanding the cause, they couldn't adapt. You can't counter a modification you don't even know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft. The kill ratio had flipped. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were shooting down Zeros faster than they were being lost. Japanese command issued a new order: avoid engaging P-38s unless you outnumber them significantly. That single directive marked the turning point. The Zero had gone from hunter to hunted, and all because of a 6-inch piece of piano wire that nobody was authorized to install. The modification never became official during the war. Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943, when a maintenance inspector at WWII noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the irregularities to the hidden piano wire tensioners, wrote a detailed report, and sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification broke regulations, but it worked. Fighter squadrons that used it showed measurable improvements in kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. The question wasn't whether the piano wire helped. The question was whether to punish the mechanics who installed it without authorization or quietly approve it after the fact. In November, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to investigate. They tested the modified aircraft, measured the control cable tension, calculated stress loads, and performed flight trials. Their conclusion was clear. The modification was safe, effective, and should have been part of the original design. Lockheed integrated a similar built-in tensioning system into the P-38J model, which entered production in December 1943. But Technical Sergeant James McKenna received no recognition, no commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation credited the improvement to engineering analysis. McKenna's name never appeared anywhere. Lieutenant Robert Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, and returned home to Iowa in 1945. He married his high school sweetheart, raised 4 children, and worked as a crop duster for 37 years. But he never forgot what McKenna had done. Every year on August 17th, Hayes called McKenna to thank him for saving his life. Captain Frank Mitchell also survived. He went on to become a squadron commander, leading his unit through the Philippines campaign and scoring 16 victories. After the war, he remained in the Air Force, retiring as a colonel in 1963. He told McKenna's story to every young maintenance officer he mentored, reminding them that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see the problems engineers overlook. McKenna stayed in the Army Air Forces until 1946. Then he returned home to California. He went back to working on engines and opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He spent 42 years fixing cars. He rarely spoke about the war. When people asked, he simply said, "I was a mechanic, fixed airplanes, that's all." In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found references to a piano wire tensioner in old maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked McKenna down through veteran registries. By then, McKenna was 73 years old, still working part-time in his garage. When asked about the modification, McKenna confirmed the story modestly. He said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian later estimated that the modification had saved between 80 and 100 American pilots' lives, based on improved survival rates among squadrons that used it. McKenna said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back, Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, and the others. That was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at age 88. He was buried at Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic. It didn't mention the piano wire. It didn't mention that he changed how American fighters flew. It didn't mention that he broke regulations to save lives. His garage in Long Beach is still there under new ownership now. But in the back office, hanging on the wall, there's a faded photograph. A young mechanic in oil-stained coveralls standing beside a P-38 Lightning. On the back, written in pencil, are the words, August 1943, New Guinea. That is how real innovation happens in war, not in conference rooms or through layers of command. It happens in hangars and muddy airfields through sergeants and mechanics who see a problem, find a solution, and refuse to wait for permission to save lives. For more stories like this, make sure to subscribe.